Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the special session on the experiences from the Republic of Korea and beyond, progress, challenges, and new visions. My name is Soon-yong Park. I'm a professor of education in Yonsei University based in Seoul, Korea. I'll be your host for this session today. As many of you have come to know, ever since the adoption of the Incheon Declaration during the World Education Forum in 2015, the Republic of Korea has been one of the avid champions of global citizenship education, as well as education for sustainable development. Over the years, South Korea has actively embraced both GCED and ESD, as evidenced by the strides she has made in integrating their core tenets into new curricular development and education practices. In fact, a new national curriculum that is set to begin next year will further reflect such tendencies to incorporate pedagogical elements that are grounded on and promoted by SDG 4.7. In this session, we would like to share the experiences with regard to transformative initiatives developed in South Korea that have paved the way to facilitate and promote SDG 4.7 in the education sector and beyond. We will especially focus on some key enabling factors, such as policy support and teacher empowerment. At the same time, we will also look into some of the challenges and tasks that have emerged along the way. Today, we are lucky to have two very able presenters, Professor Park Hwanbo of Chungnam National University and Mr. Yang Cheol-Jin, a teacher at Songwoo Middle School in Gyeonggi Province, Korea. They will provide us with an overall picture of the Korean experiences and progress on the promotion of SDG 4.7. Also with us today are Professor IConGCEED of Cheongju National University of Education in Korea and Professor Benavot of the University of Albany in the US, who will follow the presentation as discussants. We have been allotted 45 minutes, which is rather tight. So without further ado, let's begin with our first presentation by Professor Park, who will be joining us online. Professor Park, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Park. My name is Hwanbo Park. I'm an associate professor of Chungnam National University in South Korea. First of all, it is a great honor for me to be invited here to present on Korean case of SDG 4.7 implementation. Today, I'm going to share experience about how the Korean government and educators have been integrating value, concept, framework, and pedagogy from the Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.7 into Korean education. Next, please. Such efforts overlap with other transformative initiatives discussed in South Korea, including multicultural education, democratic citizenship education, human rights education, peace education, education for international understanding, and more recently, global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. Looking at the various discourse and practice on transformative education in South Korea, we can find some progress and implication for the future. First of all, the Korean government has set these transformative initiative as a policy goal at both the national and regional level. And they have implemented a number of programs to promote SDG 4.7, particularly through the GCED and ESD. Next, please. The Korean government has also proposed the inclusion of values such as self-directed creativeness, innovation, inclusiveness, and citizenship into the vision for the new national curriculum. Regional Office of Education in Seoul City, Gyeonggi Province, Incheon City, and Gangwon Province have also collaboratively developed textbooks to support transformative education in practice. Next, please. Teachers are recognized as one of the main actors to implement transformative education in school. Teachers, of course, critical for the long-term success of program. Therefore, the Korean government since 2015 has been providing teacher training program in cooperation with UNESCO APCEIU. These programs aim to cultivate the knowledge, value, and skill necessary to support teachers to foster transformative education. There is also professional learning community organized by teachers themselves to implement SDG 4.7 represented by GCED and ESD. Next, please. We can also find the various cases of transformative education in the non-formal education sector, as well as in school. One of the notable trends is civil society growing collaboration and cooperation with school, not only for the extracurricular activity or after-school program, but also on the development of lesson plans and teacher training. It is natural for civil society group to be interested in SDG, but particularly since 2015, there has been a sharp increase in quantity of educational programs related to SDG 4.7 provided by NGO, often called school. South Korea has a systematic support for lifelong learning through government or semi-government-run or supported lifelong learning center and program, which have rapidly expanded over the years. Citizenship education has emerged as one of the key contents area of lifelong learning in South Korea, and GCED is gaining its attention and interest. Next, please. Another progress is GCED program beyond the national boundary. Group of Friends on Solidarity and Inclusion with GCED was launched at UNESCO in 2020, for which South Korea has been taking a leading role. It is an exemplar case where the area of foreign policy taking interested in education, SDG 4.7 is seen as critical to building a peace. South Korea has also been very actively engaging with other countries in collaborating and cooperating for the promotion of SDG 4.7. Good practice cases include the International Teacher Exchange Program to GCED and ESD, and GCED Curriculum Development and Integration Project, which assists partner countries to mainstream GCED into their national curriculum. Next, in order to monitor the progress of GCED SDG 4.7, I, together with the research, have carried out APCEIU research project on monitoring, and we selected the following thematic area and relevant keywords. With these keywords, we attempted to measure the degree to which transformative education is mainstream within the current educational policies. Next, please. According to the result, the total percentage of transformative education in South Korea is about 7.4% of the project in educational policy document of Metropolitan and Provincial Office of Education, and it decreased from 8.3% last year. There is also a gap between regions in the degree to which transformative education is mainstream. Next. There are also differences in topics emphasized by Regional Office of Education. For example, ESD is emphasized in Busan City, while Global Citizenship Education is emphasized in Sejong City. In spite of the growing interest, commitment, and invest in transformative education, it remains uncertain how and whether these efforts are actually leading to meaningful transformation of education school and learner. According to the result of recent research that investigate teachers' recognition of mainstreaming of GCED in education, more efforts are still required in Korea. Another challenge is making a consensus among teachers for transformative education. Mainstreaming transformative education does not only mean to emphasize it in policy, but also to build consensus on it among teachers. Recent research that explored that factors that affect teachers teaching global issues and their capacity to do so indicate the importance of consensus building. The more that teachers perceive school leader and their peer teacher as supporting transformative education, the more they are likely to practice transformative activity themselves in school. Without the voluntary effort and cooperation of teachers, it would be difficult for government to make policy a success in school. I have identified teacher as a key driving force for transformative education in South Korea. We have a brief video on how teachers try to transform class to encourage more critical thinking and related learning to learners read as well as social issues. This includes some of teachers' efforts to turn this pandemic crisis into learning opportunity for education for social justice, human rights, anti-discrimination, and other issues areas of GCED. Let's watch the video clip together.
코로나 바이러스가 생겼어. 그럼 아까 얘기했던 그 사회적 약자에 대한 불평등은 더 나아졌을까, 더 심해졌을까? 불평등 바이러스라고 불린대요. 교과서를 넘어서서 실제로 일어나는 일들, 또 글로벌 이슈, 내지는 우리 주변의 일들을 중심으로 학생들하고 얘기를 많이 하는 편이고요. 특히 저는 학생들이 생활 장면, 일상적인 생활 장면이나 아니면 수업 장면에서 그런 세계 시민 교육적인 요소들 혹은 보편적인 가치들을 연결해서 아이들하고 많이 고민을 해보고 있습니다. 중요한 거는 아이들의 그런 논쟁이 될 수 있는 주제를 찾아내는 게 참 중요한 것 같아요. 그리고 그 주제는 아이들과 연결되어 있어야 돼요. 그게 가장 큰 핵심적인 내용인 것 같고요. 학생들이 스스로 생각하고 표현할 수 있는 환경을 만들어주고 한 명 한 명이 다 자기 목소리를 낼 수 있는 기회를 주는 게 필요하다고 생각이 들고요. 사고에 징검다리를 넣는다라는 것처럼 아이들이 스스로 얘기하면서 확장되어 가는 게 보이더라고요. 그래서 그런 환경을 만들어주는 거, 그게 교사의 역할이 아닌가 싶습니다.
정의로운 사회는 어떤 모습일까? 우리 이렇게 다양한 사람들 달리기 출발하는데 이거 정의로운 거라고 했어? 안 정의로운 거라고 했어?
수업은 그리고 아이들을 가르치는 건 답을 찾는 과정이라고 생각하지는 않아요. 많은 아이들이 자기의 생각을 이야기해보고 또 다른 친구들과 의견적으로 부딪히는 경험을 해봄으로써 생각이 바뀌고 다듬어지고 세워져 가는 그런 과정을 맛보기를 원해요. 하나는 제가 받았던 교육에 대한 답답함, 두 번째로는 제가 교사가 돼서 바꿀 수 있을 거라고 생각했던 교육의 모습에 대한 어려움, 이 두 가지가 저로 하여금 교육에 대해 고민해보게 만들고 또 세계시민교육이나 가치지향적인 교육에 관심을 갖게 만든 것 같아요. 누군가 만들어 놓은 지식을 공부하는 것이 아니라 사회에 나가서 내 삶을 주체적으로 개선해 나가고 우리 사회가 가진 문제점들에 대해서 비판적인 시각으로 해결해 나가려면 이런 가치지향적인 교육들, 이런 세계시민 교육들을 해야겠구나라는 생각이 들었어요.
한국 선생님들은 열정도 역량도 대단하고 끊임없이 고민하고 노력해요. 우리 사회가 선생님을 신뢰하고 선생님들의 자발성을 뒷받침해 줄 수 있는 좀 더 열린 교육 과정과 정책이 이루어졌으면 좋겠습니다.
Thank you. I hope all of you enjoyed the video clip. Now, Mr. Yang will share his insights on issues of teacher education.
예, 안녕하세요. 저는 한국에 사는
Hello, everyone. I am Yang Cheol-Jin, a teacher of a middle school in Korea. So today, I would like to first of all say that I'm very delighted to be here. And this is actually an absolute honor to me and my family, to be honest with you. Now, today, I would like to talk about what's happening on the ground in the Korean classroom and how these transformative education is being implemented on the ground. Now, I would think that in Korea, the global citizenship education was brought about with the momentum in 2015 Incheon Education Forum. And since then, the global citizenship education received great highlights with the policies at the national level. And in the process, teachers at school level received educations and some of the trainings and opportunities for them to think about how they can incorporate global citizenship into their curriculum and the learning setting. Now, from the policy front, I think that with regard to global citizenship, the lead teacher program is something that needs to be highlighted. This is coming from the Ministry of Education and 17 Board of Educations or the Office of Educations. And there are some other provincial offices and the other relevant bodies. And really, they brought together and came together in order to bring the lead teachers program into effect. Now, in that process, there have been various programs to help the teachers for this. And on the global citizenship, there are many trainings that were conducted. Teachers learned about transformative education and also for the global citizenship. And after that, when it comes to the global citizenship, we saw the textbooks and the materials that have been published ever since. And since those publications came into effect, the pedagogy on the transformative education was really brought into the fore amongst the teachers. After the lead teacher program, let me see how the landscape of the Korean environment changed. And I would like to bring your attention to what's happening here. The teachers have become very interested and keen on this topic. And through these engagement and topics, we saw some of the actions being taken place on the ground. It's the individual teachers, but also the school. At the school level, there has been an explosive interest on the global citizenship. And thanks to that, many programs for the training programs for the teachers came to forth. And trainings actually facilitated and accelerated the interest amongst the teachers. And it became a very voluntary movement for them to gather around one another and start and have greater momentum on this. Now, I guess my point is that the education on the global citizenship now is getting a lot of attention and some actions on the ground amongst the teachers. And I would like to give you some examples. There are many communities amongst the teachers where they delve into the topics of global citizenship. And in that process, government organizations, NGOs, and schools and teachers are also sometimes joining hands and collaborating for this learning. Not only that, many teachers are starting to write books on this topic and participating in some of the joint research on that topic. Now, the results of such are being published or disclosed on some of the platforms and YouTube and podcasts. And these are being accumulated in various platforms around the world. Through these process, I think what has become clear is that pre-2015 global citizenship was there, but I think it was really from 2015, the Incheon Forum, that really continued the legacy from the pre-2015 global citizenship education, but it was brought into a higher level and really extensive since the 2015. And as these are being gathered and shared extensively, we are seeing some of the progresses when it comes to the transformative education. So that's all that I have for you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yang. Yeah. In conclusion, in our presentation, Korea's experience showed that policy support and teacher education, teacher empowerment are key factors to implementing transformative education. These experiences provide key insights that could further support the design, implementation, and evaluation of transformative education in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Dr. Park and Mr. Yang, for the very informative and insightful presentation. Through the presentations, I think we were able to learn a bit about some of the transformative experiences of teachers in Korea and their efforts to bring changes to the classroom. It seems to me that critical thinking and action-oriented learning outcomes in ESD or GCED were both present and emphasized here. However, it's not always easy to see how transformation actually takes place or is expressed among learners themselves. So along these lines, I'd like to hear from our discussants what they think. First, I'd like to invite Professor Lee to share concrete cases with us, and then Professor Benavot to discuss the issue further and also comments regarding issues of monitoring. Both of you will be given 5 minutes each. Professor Lee?
Okay, thank you, Professor Park. First of all, I'm very delighted to participate in this UNESCO forum and to listen to various cases and discussions related to transformative education. As previously presented by Professor Hwanbo Park, Mr. Cheol-Jin and some teachers in the video clips, GCED and ESD are being tried in various schools and other settings in Korea under various names. So many notable examples are being found among them. There are many cases which I would like to share with you, but time is limited. So I would like to introduce a couple of cases from Guksabong Middle School and Songnam High School, which are closely linked to Songdaeol Village in school. In 2018, students at Guksabong Middle School conducted activities to analyze the promises of candidates who are aspiring to become heads of local government during social studies study. So it was related to democratic citizenship education. During those activities, these students realized that there was no environment-related content in the promises made by candidates for heads of local government. And so they wanted to form a group of study group to do some to study environmental issues together. At the same time, they became interested in the issue of climate crisis and participated in the climate crisis emergency action in 2019 with high school students. Then In March 2020, they submitted a constitutional petition related to the climate crisis towards government and the national agencies, National Assembly. You can see some pictures in this slide. After that, the superintendent of provincial education offices in the whole country made an emergency declaration for environmental education on climate crisis, and the Ministry of Education, the Minister of Education announced that she would strengthen climate change and environmental education and ESD in the next curriculum to be revised in 2022, which was kept. So it is expected that there will be many visible changes in the school settings in the future. This might have been possible because there is Seongdaegol village near Guksabong Middle School and Songnam High School. The educational activities of the school are closely linked to people of Seongdaegol village. The village is a relatively underdeveloped neighborhood located in the southern part of Seoul. So it can be said it is a village with a rather low socioeconomic status in this village. So there are people, but there are people who would like to fulfill the dream of becoming an energy transition town, starting from a small neighborhood library after being shocked by the 2011 Fukushima nuclear power plant accident in Japan. So the villagers of Seongdaegol village work together to study and discuss how to make the village a better and sustainable place to live with, creating a cooperative, an energy supermarket, and a living lab in the village. So this slide shows some activities by Seongdaegol village people, and this slide this slide is the investigation content of Songnam High School sophomore students participating in the living lab in Seongdaegol village. They were responsible for investigating the current situation of the area, examining the vulnerable population of the area, how they live and what their needs are. This study explores who are the most vulnerable people and how to support them in the face of extreme weather caused by climate crisis in the forum. Students presented and shared their findings. However, these findings might soon lead to practical changes, large or small, who knows? And I used to so much time, so shall we stop here? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing the case with us, Dr. Lee. Now we would like to move on to Dr. Benavot's comments.
Thank you very much, Professor Park, and this is really a great honor to be here in Seoul with my Korean colleagues. I very much appreciate the invitation to participate in this particular session. So I'd like to divide my comments into two, let's say, categories. One has to do with the issue of the enabling conditions that we saw discussed in both the presentations and in the video, and then briefly some comments about the issue of monitoring. So for me, as somebody who's only spent various occasions here in South Korea, one thing is very clear, a very important enabling condition is what often is called the political will. That there is very strong political will for this idea of global citizenship education, and that even though the regime has changed over the period of the last whatever decade and more, there's been a consistent commitment to ensuring the importance of this concept and to see it implemented throughout the education system and even beyond in non-formal education. This is not an insignificant matter, and I think it's very clear. Secondly, it's also very clear that there are multiple stakeholders, multiple individuals and entities that are really, that feel that they have a stake in ensuring this idea of a global citizenship education, both in its in conception and also its implementation. We see the central government, obviously, but we also see the municipalities and the provincial governments that play a very important role in the policy implementation. We see the role of a very strong civil society, many different civil society organizations that are contributing at the school level, at the community level. We see teachers engaged. We see very different and important constituents who are all involved, which I think is very important too. A next condition that I would talk about is that maybe it's a little bit lost on our colleagues here in Korea, is that in some ways the notion of global citizenship is both a comprehensive notion, but also a very flexible notion. So it includes many different elements, different themes that may have come, at some point maybe an emphasis more on human rights or on multiculturalism, and in other cases, education for democracy or active citizenship. So there have been different themes that have been more ascendant in different periods during this period of time. But overall, it shows that global citizenship education is a very comprehensive notion that involves many different kinds of issues, and there's a certain flexibility here. I think it's also very telling the incredible focus on teachers, on preparing teachers, on engaging teachers, on making teachers, giving them opportunities to kind of bring about their professional competence into the classroom and ensure that they can really implement and also engage with their students in various kinds of pedagogical practices. I understand that some of the teacher organizations here would like to see greater autonomy, professional autonomy among some of the teachers, but certainly it seems that the teacher preparation and engagement is a very important role. So all of these, I think, speak to very important enabling conditions for this important policy. Maybe one way to think about this is that often UNESCO has talked about the importance of a whole school effort in order to implement, let's say, Target 4.7, whether it be ESD or GCED. But what we see in Korean society is more almost a whole sector, if not a whole society, commitment and engagement in this area, with a much longer history of engagement than many other countries in the world, which is one of the reasons why there's much to be gained from looking very in depth at the Korean case. Now, in terms of monitoring, I'll just say a few words here because maybe we'll have a chance to go back and talk about it in just a moment. But clearly the emphasis here in Korea is to monitor actively the inputs into what goes on in schools and in classrooms, in terms of teachers, in terms of curricula, in terms of classroom resources and such. The emphasis is monitoring the inputs. We have very less information about what actually happens in classrooms, which is not necessarily something distinctive about South Korea. That's very difficult to do monitoring of what goes on in classrooms. But we do see here that there's less engagement in trying to assess or monitor some of the outcomes of the kind of interventions in this area. And this is maybe something that the Korean policymakers and other stakeholders wish to consider in greater depth and detail in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the thoughtful comments, Dr. Benavot. I couldn't agree with you more that global citizenship is a comprehensive and can be very flexible in its application in the case of Korea. And you also certainly gave us some food for thought with regard to the monitoring issue. I guess we should take some questions now. Does anyone on the floor have any further comments or questions concerning both the presentations and the discussion? We have about 5 minutes at this point. Well, to speed things up, if we don't have any questions from the floor, I would like to invite all the panelists to maybe share their thoughts on why we would succeed or fail when we translate our well-intended education for transformative learning into genuinely transformative experiences, beings, and actions. So along those lines, if you could give us maybe a quick 1 minute, under 1 minute remarks. Would you like to start, Dr. Benavot?
Thank you very much. So for me, one of the issues about transformation occurs at two levels, at the level of the learner, but also at the level of the collective. And I think much of the engagement of South Korea has been focused on transforming learners. And the question is also this question of the nature of the learning experience. Is it focused on the cognitive? We often talk about the hand, the heart, and the hand, the heart, and the head. So much of the focus in many countries is really on the cognitive side, on the head. And you can see that this focus on active learning is to get children much more socially and emotionally engaged in the learning. And eventually, we would think that this would also have some impact on their behavior and their willingness to take action. So the question becomes, how do you both prepare teachers and provide educational materials that speak to these three different dimensions: the hand, the head, and the heart? And I think here, Korea also has lessons to be learned or experiences to acquire that would enable them to move forward in this way too, that would have an impactful impact on learners. And then the extent to which the school is engaging with the surrounding communities and bringing in real problems that are facing the communities is this idea of transforming society, the collective, and not just the learners, assuming that they would take these experiences with them when they become adults. So you would want learners not just to become good future citizens, but to become active citizens today in the ways in which they engage the world.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, would you like to give us your final remark?
Yeah, regarding your question, I might say some are successful and others are not. But I would like to say two important factors to make some influence to the success of transformative education. The first one is teachers' competency. So I think the collective effort of teachers are very important, like professional learning communities or something like that. So in that community, people are working together to discuss together and to think together, to plan together, and then to implement together, and then to reflect together. So I think those kind of activities are very, very important. And then the second important vectors is the, how can I say, community-based one. So the relevance of issues. As many presenters and discussants mentioned before, I think real problem and authentic problem is really important in this kind of transformative education. So I think they can, those kind of issues can come from the neighborhood and other communities. So I think a local community, the linkage and connection with the local community is really important. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And 양 선생님 간단하게.
제가 생각할 때 변혁적 교육을 좀
I think for transformative education to take root within the school setting, first of all, right now we have a very uniform education system, and there aren't that many support diversity. So we need to diversify the schemes, support schemes for schools. Another thing is that for transformative education, there are some unique characteristics of Korea. We had the candlelight political protests back many years back, and through that we really learned about the active citizenship. So participatory and activeness of elements should be highlighted. Was highlighted in the transformative education. Now, in the school setting, this participation will have to be incorporated into the school setting. Now, that's something that we really need to look into down the road.
Okay. With that last remark, I'm afraid we've just about run out of time, so we will have to conclude the session. I'm sure that some of you, the audiences out there, may have some burning questions to ask the panelists, but we will share the summary of the discussion on the discussion board after this session. Thank you for being with us today. And thank you to the panelists and discussants for a wonderful session. This concludes the special session on Korea. Thank you.